From the frozen tundra of Metrotown, British Columbia, I am Jordan Bateman. I'm Vice President Communications, Independent Contractors Business Association. Welcome to BC Poly Hot Stove. Joining me in slightly balmier.
Yeah, slightly balmier. I'm Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca here from, there's still some snow here in Victoria, but we have it a lot better than you do. This is BC Poly Hot Stove. Speaking of the frozen tundra, this is the podcast that would go for it on fourth down when you're down by 10 in the fourth quarter.
Just in general, that is a wise maneuver. The Green Bay Packers, though, my Packers, Keith Baldry's Packers, defeated the evil Seattle Seahawks and now are on to the NFC Championship. Much gloating ensued on Twitter by Keith and myself and Chanel Pretrap from the great Global BC Sports Department.
Right.
Maybe the only three Packer fans in the Lower Mainland or in British Columbia, but well worth the victory lap for us after the horrors that Russell Wilson has put us through in recent years.
Well, he certainly has been a tormentor of yours. And you know what? Russell Wilson played very well. He has nothing to be ashamed of.
Slayed the dragon. Don't take this away from us.
I'm telling you, build up your opponent, and it means you have accomplished more, right?
That's right,
Like you beat Russell Wilson. That's right. In the playoffs. He was pulling out all the stops. I mean, he was doing everything he could, but the Packers are moving on. He's
scary good. But, it felt like watching them actually felt like watching Packers teams from the last few years where they had a great quarterback and nothing else. And by sheer force of will, that quarterback can get you to a certain spot, but it's hard to break through in the end. You need some help. Someone's got to make a block for him at some point. I mean, that's terrible.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I will be cheering for the Packers next week because I don't like Jimmy Garoppolo all that much.
You don't like handsome Jimmy? Poor guy.
I don't know why. I don't like the 49ers. I know why.
We have
I'm a
nightmares.
Broncos fan and I still haven't forgiven them from 55-10.
Nightmares of George Kittle running all over our poor farm boys from Wisconsin. Okay, Maclean. In December, I recall the premier of this province telling me that a resolution was imminent on the big strike that's been going on in the forestry sector on Vancouver Island. It's now been a month since he made that statement. Surely it's settled by now, right?
Yeah, no, doesn't sound like it's any progress has been made. And in fact, not only has there been no settlement reached, the sides still aren't talking. I mean, these sides are not only are they far apart, they seem to be getting further apart. One of the news items this morning was the steelworkers were taking shots at elected officials, but clearly they meant Gabby Wickstrom, the mayor of Port McNeill, for not understanding some of the issues at stake, and implying that clearly if she had done her homework, she'd be backing the steelworkers. Look, I'm not taking sides in this dispute, but if the mayor of the community most affected by this isn't allowed to say, hey, this is devastating my community, then the steelworkers should have taken that opportunity to not say anything.
Is this a classic example of the steelworkers mansplaining or strike-splaining?
I think I didn't even consider the mansplaining angle. I would have said more strike-splaining, and I guess to her credit, Mayor Wickstrom did not play the gender card. But you know what? There might be an element of that there. The other thing, did you see the speaking of strikes? This isn't a BC news thing, but it always drives me crazy when strikes post names and pictures of what they call scab workers.
Yes.
No.
Unifor has done this on the. This is actually a BC issue because the co-op is huge in British Columbia.
That's right.
But yeah, Unifor, Jerry Diaz, the frankly scummy leader of the Unifor union, tweeting out, posting pictures of workers who were, crossing picket lines. It's a refinery. You probably want people in there making sure things are, safe. Like just throwing that out there. But this is the second time he's done that. Remember, he did it in the Atlantic provinces. And where are the Unifor journalists? Why aren't you standing up for truth and justice and fairness and reporting on your scummy leaders' actions? Unifor is, I think, the single biggest union for the journalists across the country. I'd like to see some reporters actually do the friggin' job and hold power to account, whether it's government or union power.
And speaking of, union connections, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm not, but I think at a certain point, we're going to have to start shedding more light on the connection between the steelworkers who are the union striking in Port McNeill and the party in power. because, it's probably an oversimplification to say that steelworkers paid for the NDP election campaign, but they were significant contributors.
Yeah.
And if this was in reverse, if this was a lockout under a BC Liberal government and the company doing the locking out was a significant contributor, that would get mentioned every single day.
Yeah.
That's just true.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, I think John Horgan, at the very least, I hope he's feeling a little uncomfortable about this, because frankly, he should.
Yeah, and the question is, so, what are they doing about it? I mean, we saw before Christmas that incredible video leak of the meeting where the forest workers were talking to Claire Trevena, and all she would say is, oh, I'm going to take it back to Doug Donaldson. I'll take it back to Doug Donaldson. Now a month has gone by. She's done nothing still. Doug Donaldson has done nothing. John Horgan's basically saying, well, it doesn't matter. Like, they should work it out the table. He broke a promise to the public saying that, this is going to be wrapped up quickly, and it's not. There are options available to labor ministers, to governments, not to mention, the political levers they can pull just by their very, very, very close incestuous relationship with the steelworkers. Why don't the NDP do something?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, imagine being one of these people affected by this strike in Port McNeill. There must just be frustration across the board.
Oh.
First of all, I mean, we can't even begin to summarize what going 7 months without a paycheck or, income coming into your community is like. But if you can set that aside for a second, which is difficult to do, consider that they probably don't have a lot of political leverage because the NDP consider North Island to be a safe seat. And so, yes, Claire Trevena is less safe than she was a year ago, but, I mean, this isn't a swing riding. We just mentioned the steelworkers NDP connection, so you've got to be wondering if it was a different union, maybe the NDP would apply a little more pressure. And also just the fact that you're in Port McNeill. If this was a 7-month strike affecting Vancouver, Surrey, Victoria, almost anywhere else, you can be damn sure that there would be the pressure for intervention would be rising steadily. Unfortunately, for some reason, people seem to think, and by people I mean the government and the union, seem to think that, well, it's Port McNeill, it's acceptable losses, and that's just, how do you swallow that on a day-to-day basis if you're up there?
Yeah, I don't know, and this is what's frustrating the union is Gabby Wickstrom's done a good job of pointing out, people are having their hydro shut off, people are losing their homes. Families are divorcing, splitting up, all because of the stress caused by, not having a paycheck for 7 months. I don't know about you, Maclean. Our family is pretty solid, but 7 months without a paycheck would stress a lot of our resources, our energy, our emotional health for sure.
Well, it gets to the point where, some of the usual things you hear during work stoppages, times are tough, or, it's just sacrifices, or it's been inconvenient is a word I keep hearing. This is long since past that. When families are breaking up. Yeah.
Someone's going to kill themselves. And then will the government, this is where it's heading. People are, despairing, and there's no end in sight. And, you have John Horgan kind of, I don't know if you were at the presser yesterday, I'm not sure where it was, but, John Horgan just kind of, whatever, keep calm, carry on.
Yeah, it's a shame, and I hope obviously that doesn't happen. But I mean, as you say, families are breaking up. This has already reached the level of tragedy, and no matter who's at fault at this point, I don't care. I just want this community to have a chance.
Yeah. Find every lever possible. Political prediction, Gabby Wickstrom wins re-election with a wider margin than previously, and Claire Trevena may hang on, but she'll have a much smaller margin than she previously had.
Yeah, that is a tough riding to crack for anybody. I think the NDP have won it every year since, the 70s when the riding was formed, with the exception of the 2001 massacre. Yeah. And Claire Trevena won the riding by 8 and 12 points, respectively, in the last two elections. So, I mean, it's a fairly safe riding. Though that said, this is
it all depends how those workers are feeling and how their friendship circles are feeling. I mean, that can change, so we'll see. Speaking of change, I think this is the week that Justin Trudeau kind of grew up. We had the absolutely horrific tragedy, 63 Canadians killed in that. It's not a plane crash. The plane was shot down over Iran.
Exactly.
At a moment where the world is on edge over what's happening in that country already, a country we have no official diplomatic ties with, and he's risen to the occasion by foregoing selfies and clown face and all that nonsense he usually pulls, and instead acting like a serious concerned, head of state should. And, not a big Trudeau fan, don't like many of his policies, think he's pretty shallow, but you got to hand it to him. He's trying to keep things calm on this file, which I think is very important. And at the same time, trying to work through allies and try to work with Iran to find out exactly what happened and get some justice for, all these families and friends who have lost loved ones. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. I don't think there's much to criticize in how the Prime Minister's handled this in the last week or so. He's walked a pretty, and this is he's walked a pretty fine line, which is, I mean, as a compliment, because he's resisted calls from both sides, you might say. There's a lot of people on the left in this country, for example, have wanted to heap blame on this to Donald Trump, which Trudeau did not do. In fact, rather explicitly did not do. He said, Iran shot down the plane and then lied about it. This is clearly their fault. But he's also not. There are some people who said, well, we have to. The revenge must be taken. And like, no, he's appealed for calm. Yeah. He is working with the people in Iran who so the Canadian investigators have access to the information. I mean, I don't see how he could have handled this better, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, look, you could be a hawk, but I'm not sure what hammer we have to bring down on Iran.
Well, there are no airstrikes from Canadian aircraft carriers in the offering.
What are we saying? We're going to shoot down an Iranian aircraft? Like, come on. That doesn't make any sense. It's more important that we find out the truth of what happens. And it's more important, frankly, that we, quietly go about our business and hope that the protests against the current regime in Iran continue, because they seem... two of Iranian state TV news anchors resigned last night. Said that they were tired of lying for this administration and weren't going to do it anymore. Apologized for misleading the public for 13 years and resigned. That, it's one thing to quit a job here, Maclean. If I resign in protest because ICBA does something I don't like, I don't have to worry about waking up dead the next day. These people can be taken away and snuffed out immediately by the Iranian officials. I admire that kind of courage is unbelievably admirable, and you got to hand it to them. So you want to see those protests continue, because it is these kind of things when the people start to turn. You think back to the Berlin Wall, it can happen quickly. Change can come very, very quickly. Iran wasn't always this very theocratic nation. It was a very for lack of a term, Western kind of democracy for a long time. So it's possible that could come back. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But in the meantime, I thought Jagmeet Singh was, for a guy who himself navigated some very thorny issues during the election very well.
Exactly, very well.
Blundering all over the place on this one. I mean, tweeting out blaming Donald Trump for an Iranian. That's just Trump derangement more than anything else.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, insisting that Donald Trump is not responsible for another country shooting down a plane is not an endorsement of Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. There are too many people that seem to think that you're somehow standing up for Trump if you say it's somebody else's fault. No. It's just it's frustrating.
It's weird. Hey, Coastal GasLink, tell me what's going on there with our favorite 5 hereditary chiefs.
Man, I mean, we could do a whole show on this alone, but I mean, the capsule summary is, despite a court order mandating that the work continue, the Wet'suwet'en, or I should say the Unistoten, evicted Coastal GasLink's workers and said again that the work won't continue, et cetera, and so forth. Now, apparently they have let them back in to winterize the site, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But also the RCMP have set up a checkpoint, and it's just the UN. We talked about the UN last week. This week, BC's Human Rights Commissioner weighed in. I don't see that. Yeah,
she actually said that we should be our laws to pass by our elected government should be subject to the whims of an unelected United Nations committee. What planet are you on? This is unbelievable. John Horgan, even Horgan must be like, oh my God, come on.
Well, I mean, he wouldn't phrase it in that way, but Horgan did say yesterday, no, the rule of law we have to be under subject to the rule of law in this province, and that this project is going to go ahead, and it does have I think to his credit, Horgan pointed out, look, this project has the written agreement and approval of all 20 elected band councils along its way, including the Wet'suwet'en.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there has been a tendency to portray the Wet'suwet'en as, A, unified on this, and B, somehow speaking for all First Nations across this province and country. And it's just not true.
No.
This is one faction of one First Nation, which has gotten a lot of media attention, I guess, to its credit. But, I mean, they do not speak for the entire, not only do they not speak for the entire Wet'suwet'en, the people elected within the Wet'suwet'en vehemently disagree.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. So we'll wait and see there. I've been looking a little bit more into these hereditary chiefs because it's such an odd thing. Like, you don't think of First Nations as monarchies, but essentially that's what these hereditary chiefs, easy for me to say, want it to be. I didn't realize, for example, I've been doing some reading by a reporter and a First Nations member named Robert Jago. I didn't realize the Kwantlen First Nation in Langley, where I live, is actually run by a hereditary chief. I know very well. Marilyn Gabriel, know her quite well, but she had one election kind of back in the 90s when her dad put her in place as his successor, and that's kind of it. So it's an interesting thing. That's something that they've got to work out amongst themselves. Yeah, it's... and then you have the hereditary chief angle, where apparently there were 3 female hereditary chiefs of the Unistoten, and the 5 men who are now fighting this kicked them out, stripped them of their hereditary titles simply because they didn't agree with them on Coastal GasLink. So you have the matriarchs of the community and the elected council saying, we want to build this pipeline and reap the economic benefits. And you have 5 so-called patriarchs, the hereditary chiefs, saying otherwise. So,
can you imagine, literally, and I mean any other scenario in which the woke side in our province and our country would be backing the 5 hereditary male chiefs against an elected council and 3 women hereditary chiefs who have been turfed for very openly just because they had opposing views? Can you imagine any other circumstance in which the woke and the left in this country would be backing that side and not the other? I can't. It's actually kind of mind-boggling that this doesn't get discussed more.
Well, I think they're so desperate to stop these projects that they've lost their core principles and core values, right? Like, it's more important to stop this project from going forward than to actually, care about feminism, care about self-governance, care about reconciliation, any of those things, which is a black mark on them. And look, Ellis Ross, other chiefs have talked a lot about greenwashing, talked about how, you'll have people use environmental things to actually further bickering within the First Nation themselves. Then you have what Ellis Ross called it, not red washing, where you have environmental groups coming in and basically try and pick up First Nation support or claim First Nation support for their causes. And all the while, we've seen it, 20 First Nations with elected governments have said, no, we want this project to go forward. And it should. And look, I don't think these guys are going away. I think John Horgan's going to have some trouble on his hands here. And I, for one, can't wait. And, welcome him to the world of trying to get things done in British Columbia.
Yeah. And it's more complicated still. And I know we're dwelling on this, but I think this is a point worth making. It was a lot easier to demonize Kinder Morgan as, first of all, an oil company based in Texas. You've heard all these points that they made before. Yeah, exactly. Coastal GasLink is very different. First of all, it's natural gas. Second of all, it's a BC company. And third, if you read Frank Peeble's piece in the Orca last week, and this is completely separate from the work that's going on within the Wet'suwet'en, Coastal GasLink has worked really hard on the reconciliation file, and very quietly and behind the scenes, and not always getting a lot of credit. The piece that Frank wrote about how the Coastal GasLink people and the First Nation, whose name escapes me at the moment, and I apologize, but this was the LeJac residential school site. Yeah. And what they did to work around that and to make sure that the people who lived there and who were affected by the trauma and tragedies that happened there were okay with what they were doing, and basically just sort of took a step back and said, look, whatever you guys need, we're going to help you with, and take your time. And so those kinds of stories obviously are never going to get the attention that conflict will, but it's kind of a shame because we need to hear those stories even just to get a fuller picture.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. That was part of Horgan's presser yesterday. One thing I want to mention is I hear he was asked again about ride sharing. Of course, he had promised, you might recall, in 2019, he promised ride sharing by the end of 2019. I think by
More
the end,
than once.
By the end of 2018, he had promised it by the end of 2018, by the end of 2019. Here we are, January 2020, and still can't open my Uber app, still can't open my Lyft app. I guess if I'm in Tofino, I can get a ride in the one van going around there, but they can't get any Class 4 drivers. So great job.
Tremendous.
You know, if you're the taxi lobby, you're like, man, we don't need, we love this government. Just keep dragging your heels. Are we ever? Is this the year, Maclean? Am I going to get to take an Uber sometime this year? I will, because I'm going to Nashville. That's when I will.
Well, there you go. I would have said yes, but at this point, it's just, I mean, there's been so many delays, and it's taken longer than you'd think it could. There are people, I mean, you mentioned the taxi lobby. There are people who think that the NDP is somehow doing this on purpose. I actually don't think so. I think they've just screwed it up, to be honest. I don't think this is some nefarious plot. I think they've kind of dropped the ball.
Gasp. You're saying Transportation Minister Claire Trevena, the author of community benefit agreements, the one who paved your own island, the one who canceled the massive town, screwed up? No.
I think this is more like, I think this is more like the electoral reform referendum, where they also have been accused of, doing that on purpose.
Yes.
No, they just screwed that up. Bad. And I think this is similar. And you know what? There's still time this year. Who knows? We could see. It's funny how it's January 14th today, and I'm saying there's still time this year.
We just cross our fingers.
See. I really did think that they would get it going for Christmas of this last year. I really did think that they thought that was a marker they had laid down, and that was something that I really did think that they would make that deadline, if only because they made it important, if you follow. So and now it's just, who knows?
I think every press conference, one of you should draw a straw in the press gallery and ask the question about the next holiday. So, whoever gets it this next week would say, Mr. Premier, will we have it by Groundhog Day? Mr. Premier, Mr. Premier, will we have it by Valentine's Day? Will we have it by St. Patrick's Day? Will we have it by Easter? Will we have it by Victoria Day? You just keep going. You give him 3-week increments, and just over and over again, he'll have to, well, of course we will. It's going to be great.
Well, and we'll get to Remembrance Day, and I think the answer will be, well, yeah, it's in some parts of BC and Cater and. Yeah. But I think most people define ride-hailing as Uber and Lyft, and that's still nowhere in sight. Yeah,
one more thing I want to talk about. I know I think I've accidentally scooped your cold item here, but Vaughn Palmer's piece today on the internal government memo about essentially how we get reelected. First of all, I don't know why the public service would give a crap, but there they are. A framework. Sorry, pardon me. It's called a framework for improving British Columbian standard of living. And essentially, it's how to make BC great again, really. Interesting document. First of all, interesting someone leaked it to Vaughn Palmer. It was distributed only to deputy ministers and other senior public servants, as well as selected stakeholders. That's kind of interesting. That's an interesting group of core bureaucrats who shouldn't normally care about the government's electoral fortunes. They should be advocating for good policy and refining like that. But nonetheless, that's might be naive. But my favorite parts, they want to increase government revenue without raising taxes, but then admit, well, we do need some near-term sources of incremental revenues, like taxes. So there's a problem there. The section titled "What Happened to the BC Dream." Ignoring, I guess they look at BC and claim that income has been pretty static in the last 35 years. Canada-wide, that has actually grown. That has changed. That narrative's changed. I wonder if the same has occurred in British Columbia. One would argue that, fighting energy projects and all sorts of massive infrastructure projects is not the best way to try to stop or try to grow the economy. And then they want a special, they claim that they're using tests now for policies like economic impacts, but no one's ever seen any of these documents, vetting it. And the best part, they tout how important the overseas trade offices are. Those are the trade offices they closed 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that part was embarrassing. And that, I think, one of the inclusions of little things like that answer the question that I was going to ask, which is, how did Vaughn come to acquire it? Because there's two answers. One is one of the people who received it leaked it to him because they were unhappy about it and wanted to embarrass the government, or it was straight up given to him by, like a Jeff Meggs figure who wanted to float it as basically a trial balloon for an election platform. And I think both of those things would be plausible, but the fact that there were a few little maybe should have been edited out items like that, and I think the trade office one is probably the best example, suggests that it's probably more the former than the latter, though I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think you're right. But we're starting to see a few leaks out of this government, and leaky governments generally indicate unhappy governments. So we'll have to watch for that. Okay, what's hot? Well, let me go first because it ties in.
Yeah.
I opened my little BC Today newsletter this morning, and there was the quote from John Horgan. Justin and I are absolutely giddy over having Harry and Meghan Markle move to British Columbia. Look, I'm a royalist. God save the Queen. I have no problem with Megxit. I think it's fantastic. I'd like to see them kind of strike out on their own. It's going to be bumpy. There's going to be some transition. I get more than, British Columbia, great place to raise a kid, absolutely. Come on, Harry, Meghan, Archie, settle down here. But I don't really want the Premier and the Prime Minister being giddy over the prospect. That to me just felt a little over the top.
I think it was a word that, upon reflection, Horgan would wish that one back. I think he was trying to be funny. I don't, but yeah, it's one of those things
flippant
really
Horgan's not a great
it doesn't work well. I think that's one the Premier would like back.
Yeah, flippant Horgan never goes well. It's not woke or lit to be giddy. Makes this an interesting thing. I think the most interesting as an observer from here of what's going on is seeing the way the British press treat Kate Middleton, the future queen, and the way they treat Meghan Markle. And, they can do the identical things. They show us headlines of stories, cradling baby bumps. And, Kate Middleton is a wonderful, nurturing mother who is, in love with her baby. And Meghan Markle, has deep-seated fear and loathing issues and needs mental help, right? Like, it's the exact same thing. Every mother touches their belly. It's because it's protruding. It's in the way of everything. Like They bump into things. They're afraid they're going to knock over something like that. That happens, right? This is not some sort of deep psychological thing. So, no. But seeing the difference in how the two of them are covered, man, like England needs to look in the mirror, or the British press, royal press, need to look in the mirror a little bit and ask themselves, like, what are we doing here? Kudos to Harry. Like, Harry's grown up. Harry was very young when Diana died, but he grew up hearing about it. He was probably asked lots of questions about, how his mother was treated by the paparazzi, the royal press. He's probably gone back and read some of those things, talked to William, talked to his dad, talked to, Uncle Charles, Diana's brother, and has probably come to a view like, this can be a life or death situation. And, kudos to him for doing what's right for the woman he clearly loves and his son. And, it's a big thing to walk away from that kind of wealth and that kind of prestige in order to find privacy and something that aligns more with your values.
I agree with you completely. I didn't know that was the route you were going to take on this issue. So I am a little surprised. I agree with you, actually. I think you try and put yourself in Harry's shoes and you can't do it. But imagine growing up with that's how your mother died, and that's how your mother died. I mean, first of all, the trauma of that I can't even comprehend. But second of all, watching the sort of the seeds of it happen to your wife and the mother of your son, and knowing that as rough as the press were on Diana, they're probably going to be worse with Meghan Markle.
Yes.
For three reasons, I think. One is I think standards have just gotten worse in terms of how the media treats people, especially in the UK with the tabloids. So there's that. Yes, there's a racial aspect. But I think the other thing that it also should get mentioned more is that, frankly, the fact just that she's an American and is always going to get a rougher ride. Now, I don't know what order you should put those factors in, and I can't pretend to be an expert, but all those things are in play. And if he's even kind of worried that something similar might happen to his family, wow. I mean, I think what he's done, could he have planned it out a little better? Probably, but what he's done is brave.
Yeah. Look, there's no textbook on how to do this, right? Like, how do you plan it out better? Like, it's you just got to kind of do it. I know there's like financial implications, and that'll all get worked out. And frankly, I don't think in Canada. I don't think they're going to need massive amounts of security or anything most days, right? Like it is what it is. But yeah, we'll wait and see what happens there. Maclean, are we gentle snowflakes here in British Columbia?
Yes. Yeah, quite frankly, we are. Hey, I'm guilty of this. I do this all the time, especially with my friends and family back in Calgary when they're dealing with terrible weather and I'm talking about sitting on my balcony with my shorts on, reading and, occasionally looking at the hummingbirds darting through my palm tree. That's real. So yeah, when we do deal with a little bit of winter weather, and apparently you're doing a very bad job of it, we richly deserve the rest of Canada's mocking. I tweeted a CTV Vancouver Island news story yesterday, I can't even tell the story without laughing, reminding people to properly scrape the snow and ice off their windshields, and they showed one here in Victoria. The driver had scraped out like a little eye thing like this in his windshield. It looked like a Cylon from Battlestar Galactica. It was
perfect. That's perfect. That's BC in a nutshell.
How do you defend that? You can't defend that. No,
yeah.
We've earned this. We've earned this on ourselves.
Yeah, when I worked at the Taxpayers Federation, of course, we had directors all across the country. We would do conference calls. And one time in February, I'm like, I got to close the window. The lawnmower's going by. That was not great. Not great. And then one of our prairie directors called me once and was like, hey, I saw one of your clips. How cold is it there? I'm like, I don't know, like 2-3 degrees. Like, then why are you in a winter jacket on TV? So I can't show weakness in front of the Russians. I had to get rid of the jacket.
At the risk of embarrassing my own family, my son, who will be 5 next month, I walk him to and from his preschool every day. And yesterday morning, he was so excited about the snow. He loved it. He was excited to see it. This is great. This is wonderful. On the same day, the walk home, okay, I've seen winter. I'm done. We're good. I don't want any more.
Yeah, I'm out.
It's cold.
I'm out.
I miss the grass.
I'm out. All right. Well, speaking of cold, we talked about ride hailing. Anything you want to add to that?
No, we're going to continue to wait.
Let me have a moment to talk about North Vancouver District.
Please.
My boss here, ISWA, Chris Gardner's working on an op-ed on this. So a company named Westbuild bought a waterfront property, I think it's 10 or 15 acres, and proposed some light industrial use there. It's an industrial zone. It's right by the C-SPAN boat building facility. Right now it has a small marina. It averages basically 1 job per acre for these 10 acres. They came out and said, no, we want to build some light industrial. We'll build, we'll do a bunch of different uses. We'll actually also have a craft brewery that wants to locate there, a daycare to serve kind of the industrial area as well. But, there will be industrial uses and we'll protect the marina. And it'll go from something like 1 job per acre to 50 or 75 jobs per acre.
Wow.
And North Van District said no. And they said no because it wasn't, quote unquote, industrial enough, which is code for it wasn't ugly enough, I guess. They're very worried about gentrifying the waterfront, I suppose, and having it become like Cole Harbour. Cole Harbour, of course, is now was once Cole Harbour, but is now all shiny condos and a seawall. They weren't asking for shiny condos. They weren't asking for a single person to live there. They were asking for a modern light industrial use. And what bothers me is the daycare angle. Like they kind of said, well, daycare is great, but not appropriate for this venue. These daycares are absolutely needed in industrial areas. In fact, there's one, Canada Scaffold's a member company of ours. They are over on in Richmond in an industrial area. They've run a daycare in their offices for something like 20 years. And all their kids have gone through, the next generation of workers' kids have gone through. They've had spots open from time to time that they've offered to other workers in neighboring facilities. And it's been a huge success. And it's the reason why they attract and keep workers. And, we talk about quality of life, we talk about affordability. For a young family, childcare being such a huge cost, like, why aren't we encouraging this stuff? Why are we saying industrial has to be ugly and, a place where no one really wants to be? Like, let's make it attractive to go to work there. Let's be modern. Let's find ways to do it. Industry is a lot higher tech than it used to be, and I wish the District of North Vancouver would understand that.
It's always sad when you've made ugly a virtue.
Yeah, I just don't get it. Like, and I think they sort of hope that, I think the government owns one side, C-SPAN, that maybe one of those groups would buy it, but they didn't. It was up for sale and Westbuild bought it. So, If those groups had wanted it, trust me, C-SPAN can afford it. They could have bought it. Same with the government. They don't seem to be lacking for our tax money these days. They could have bought it, but they didn't. So, you have a private proposal come in, you should, treat it with the kind of respect it deserves, and I think they should pass it. We're going to call on them to reconsider it. And it's just another kind of head-scratching decision by a municipal government in the Lower Mainland.
I don't have much to add to that other than it's frustrating, and we see far too many examples like this.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I think that's it for us. Sorry, I've been playing with my ear. My earpiece keeps popping out. I don't know what's going on here. So,
if you're listening on Spotify, you just told people you were playing with your ear.
That's right. I'm just playing with my ear constantly here. It's driving me crazy. You know who doesn't have this problem? Jody Vance, because she's a friggin' pro.
It's true.
It's amateur hour over here.
Jody did not like the lack of shout out compared to Underscore last week. So yeah, Underscore is just so adorable.
I love it when Underscore goes crazy on Tom Davidoff, because I agree with him completely. And Tom Davidoff, this is a guy who's never met a tax he doesn't love and doesn't want to increase. And, comes from the States and tells us how to live our lives here. And apparently that's by paying more in taxes. God bless you, Underscore. You're doing God's work over there. Keep fighting the fight against these Tom Davidoffs.
Does anyone do, even when Underscore gets angry and rants about something, he's still, really articulate and erudite? Yeah, I kind of aspire to that. I can't do that.
I just sputter.
If I get angry, I get angry, and I start sputtering.
Yeah, I just sputter and just kind of whatever I want, and then default to. The thing I got to be really careful of is, I love a good nickname, and friggin' Donald Trump sort of ruined that for everyone now. You can't really call him Dismal Dave Eby, even though he is dismal.
No, you're right. You does sound kind of Trumpian. The only Trump nickname that I will continue to defend is Rocket Man, which I think is still funny. But the fact that it's Trump makes it hard.
Well, low energy jab. That was pretty on the nose.
I forgot about that one. That's a good point. I forgot about that one.
Marco Rubio. Little Marco Rubio. That was classic.
Man.
Yeah, I never really got Crooked Hillary. That didn't really do it for me. But Little Marco Rubio. That poor guy. He'll go to his grave and. They'll in his eulogy they'll talk about Little Marco.
I hope not. Oh God.
All right, well that's it for us. We will be back next week for another BC Poly Hot Stove. There's still a month until they actually get back into the House here, so they're taking their sweet time for a government that claims they need to get stuff done.
Mid-February, that's the traditional start time, but the session is ungodly long. I want to say 5 months. We'll go into the deep depths of June. Yeah, we got to talk about the Poly Awards. I just don't know if I can do it for that many weeks in a row. Well, I was looking at the calendar last week, and I think the longest stretch we get is, I don't even think we get a 3-week stretch. It's 2 and then a break and then 2. So it's split up nicely. Yeah, but yeah, look at McLean trying to talk me into doing this thing, doing the QPs again. It's more me trying to talk myself into the 5-month session. Talk us off the ledge here. Yeah. Yes. All right. Well, of course, and we'll be all watching budget indications because they are on a razor's edge. So we'll see how that goes. Follow us at the Orca BC. He's at McLean K. I'm at Jordan Bateman, and we'll see you next week.